Hey guys, it's Mrs. Wallace. I hope that everybody is doing okay. I know that you have a lot of questions about the historical investigation, so I wanted to do this video just to give you a sense of the analysis and the conclusion section, and I'm just going to do my best to give you an overview of it and a little bit of an example, and in class certainly ask some more questions, and I'm happy to help you and Zoom and do all those things in an effort to support you in some of the work that you're doing. The analysis section and the conclusion section kind of think of together, although they are separate sections, and they really do finish the HI for us, so they're really the last two sections. So just to remind you, the first thing that you should really eyeball is your question. So I just have a sample question up here that we can work with a little bit. To what extent did the printing press enable the spread of the Protestant Reformation in the Holy Roman Empire after 1517? Okay, so this is pretty much a question that entails a little bit of that debate. What was it that enabled the Protestant Reformation to go viral, at least within the Holy Roman Empire? And there's probably a few different possibilities. The printing press might be one because it gets heavily utilized by Luther and some of his contemporaries. So there's a definite way in which there's some political and religious texts that are spread, a whole bunch of support of Luther's ideas are spread in some of his writings, and lots of people are engaged in that, and that's maybe partially because of the printing press. There might also be some counter arguments that perhaps the content itself, that people were kind of primed to hear these arguments because there was a lot of dissatisfaction with the corruption in the Roman Catholic Church. Perhaps there are some other, in terms of factions, and why some princes are very interested in this kind of anti-authority type of argument. So there's a variety of different pieces of information that probably connect together to enable the spread of the Protestant Reformation. This question is really all about, how much is the printing press, really part of the spread? And so in order to tease that out, in the plan of investigation, this is really all about the student putting forth basically the idea of what this investigation is going to put forth, this particular question, and basically that there's going to be a discussion about the ways in which the Reformation started to become more popular, looking at the followers of Luther and the reasons why, some of those followers engaged in, greater activity. Maybe there's also some coverage in the investigation of research related to the printing press, some of the propaganda that was used and developed as a result of the printing press, and maybe also some other things, including, the peasants who were anti-authority, or the princes and some of their motivations. A variety of those different topics are said by the student to be part of the investigation. The summary of evidence would be organized generally where there'd be one set of evidence focused on the printing press and how much the printing press, did to make the Reformation kind of go viral. And then there might be some other segments of the summary of evidence that are really dedicated to other arguments. The words that Luther used, his writing style, some of the arguments, the way that he organized some of his arguments. Some of that may have been reason. There may also have been, these other political reasons why people picked up on these arguments and kind of ran with them. So the summary of evidence would likely have, three different sections, each representing, different arguments related to this question, either supporting or negating. Okay, if I was doing the summary of evidence, I'd probably have one large section of evidence supporting the question or the hypothesis above, and then I might also have some sections of the summary of evidence negating the hypothesis. For the evaluation of sources, this is the section that you did. You would be looking for two sources that might be really significant. If I was choosing, I would look for a particular source that maybe was visual, that was using the printing press, and that was reproduced, multiple multiple times, and I would find that source in the way in which it was used by people in the time period of the 1520s or so. I might also find some evidence that suggests a challenge to the above, that maybe there was evidence of other arguments, right? Factions, people that were maybe involved in a prince who was seeking out the Lutheran cause, not necessarily because of some of the printing press, but maybe because of some anti-authority, type of motivation. So in the evaluation of sources, which is kind of limited because you're only choosing 2 sources, you really get some additional content in the summary of evidence. Look at the evaluation of sources as like an extension of the summary of evidence. You're talking about the same arguments that you're either supporting or negating, but in the case of the summary of evidence, it's a little more holistic, and you're picking and choosing pieces of evidence. In the evaluation of sources, you're teasing out within one source, okay, what is it that maybe you find either supporting or negating one of the arguments that you're looking at. And if I could give you some specific feedback related to the evaluation of sources, because I've been looking at them, and you should find some audio clip this weekend from me that gives you specific details about your evaluation of sources. Probably the biggest comment that I'm writing is that some of the evaluation of sources, well, the sources might be just fine, and the value and limitations are generally good. Try to stay away from overview type of value and limitations. Okay, overview value of limitations might be something like there's some degree of bias perhaps in the limitation. Maybe there's some type of value that there's content or information that supports one of the arguments or whatever. The more you can use your 2 sources to really specifically address the arguments that you have already articulated, you want to know how much does this source either support or negate the argument that I'm posing. Think of this as like almost like an experiment that you'd be doing in your science classes, where you have a hypothesis and then you run an experiment and you're trying to see if the data from the experiment actually support or negate your hypothesis. Your question is really posing a hypothesis that you have in the form of a question. So if I really think that the printing press enabled the spread of the Protestant Reformation, I kind of am saying to my reader, I believe that to be true, and now I'm investigating how much I might be right. Okay, so these sources that I'm putting before you, are the sources suggesting I'm right or I'm wrong in my hypothesis, and tell your reader exactly what in the source enables you to think that, right? If the source suggests that maybe the printing press was a reason for the spread of, the propaganda that, was being espoused by Luther and his contemporaries in the 1500s, then how does the source tell me that? Okay, in what way is the source limited in telling me that? The same thing with the second source. Okay, so the value and the limitation have to be very connected to the way you would use the source to either promote or negate your hypothesis. Okay, and again, it's kind of a exercise of sorts, right? You have 8 sources overall. Ideally, you're doing OPVLs on all your sources, right? Because you might talk about all of them in the analysis, but you're highlighting kind of your 2 significant sources. So don't pick a source that's just like informational, encyclopedia type source. Pick the really juicy sources that are most instrumental in deciding the outcome of your hypothesis. Okay, the analysis and the conclusion. The analysis is really meant to be where you talk about the pros and cons, basically, of the arguments you've identified, and it is like the backseat driver conversation that you're having. Here's argument 1. This is what it says. This is what I think about it. It's good in this way. It's bad in this way. Here's argument 2. This is kind of what I think about it. And then based on my assessment of these arguments, I have a conclusion. The analysis is about 1.5 pages of your voice. The conclusion is about a sentence or 2, basically saying, and as a result of my analysis, this is what I think. A conclusion is essentially your thesis statement. It could be something like, therefore, the printing press was the reason or the greatest cause of the spread of the Protestant Reformation, okay, based on my analysis of the arguments. Or your conclusion might be something like, while the printing press was a large factor in the spread of the Protestant Reformation, it would not have spread if it wasn't for the anti-church, kind of antagonistic beliefs that, something like that, okay? There are a variety of different conclusions that you can have. That conclusion is really up to you, okay? The conclusion is short. The analysis is about a page and a half. And within the analysis, okay, which is done in your voice, you can draw on the evidence. When you're talking about the argument, you might address the evidence that's attached to that argument. When you talk about the evidence, you cite it, okay? So there are some in-text citations in the analysis. Generally, the author and the page number are enough, okay? So, Wallace, page 455, or just Wallace, if there is no page number, right, then you can put the author in parentheticals. Your reader knows to go to your works cited page, okay? So I'm up to like 11 minutes already, and I know it's been a lot of talking. So what I want to do is zoom to a, no pun intended, right? But I want to zoom to a document, okay, which has the the template, okay. Yes, I had this out and now it's gone. Okay, so there's only a few minutes left in this video, but I want to give you a template, okay? And there is some latitude here. The analysis does not have to be done in 4 paragraphs, okay? And some of you will reject this template. That's okay, but I think it's useful for those of you who are worried about how to structure the analysis to have a template, okay? The first paragraph is short, okay? You're basically describing to your reader the historical context, okay, and the arguments, okay? Basically, you're introducing your reader to what it is that your analysis is about, okay? There is historical, so, the Protestant Reformation began in 1517, when Luther, pinned the 95 Theses to the Wittenberg, University, 2 or 3 sentences of that. Then we might note, historians have long debated the most significant causes for the spread of the Reformation, which included, X number of people and, however you want to use some data to suggest that this was a wide-spreading type of social movement. What is it that was that cause? And you might even say, well, some historians argue the printing press was the most significant, factor in spreading, the beliefs of Martin Luther. Other historians have challenged that point of view and have suggested, X and Y. Okay, so it is the setup for your analysis. The paragraph 2. You're basically writing about the 2 sources that you did an OPVL on, okay? And you're kind of, again, noting that there are multiple arguments that are worthy of your time, and the evidence is also, in a lot of cases, conflicting, okay? It is helpful if in your evaluation of sources, your pieces of evidence can be used to support conflicting arguments, okay? This would be 1 paragraph in my assessment, okay? And I'll show you an example, but this is basically an understanding of the 2 key sources that you did in your evaluation of sources, okay? It's not a direct repeat of everything in your evaluation of sources, but it is using those sources in a way to pull from them the key information that you need to either support or debunk a particular argument. Okay, so this is all about your hypothesis, and you're using those sources as a way to structure this. Okay, paragraphs 3 and 4 are going to be very straightforward. 1 paragraph is basically going to be, on one hand, historians consider that the printing press is a significant cause of the spread of the Reformation. Okay, supporting this include blah 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 blah. Okay, not only are you noting why historians argue the printing press is significant, but you get to kind of be a backseat driver and critique, okay, that argument, okay? You are evaluating the argument in your own voice, okay? Why you think the argument is strong or not strong, okay? The very last paragraph, okay, is basically describing a second reason, okay? So a second argument, okay? So, on one hand, historians suggest this. Your next paragraph is, on the other hand, some historians challenge, okay? And you have a discussion about that second argument, okay? The very, very last paragraph of this is 2 or 3